My beloved child, listen closely, because there is a sentence your soulmate has been carrying quietly, and the moment it finally leaves their lips, something between you may never feel quite the same again. I have something important to tell you. Those words sound simple, almost ordinary, but what sits behind them is anything but ordinary. Your soulmate has replayed this conversation in their mind more times than anyone knows. They have imagined where you might be when they say it. They have wondered whether you will look surprised, whether you will become silent, whether you will somehow recognize what they are about to reveal before they even finish speaking. And here is where this becomes interesting. What they want to tell you is not simply about a feeling that appeared yesterday. It reaches further back. There was a moment when something about you changed the way they viewed this connection, but they kept that realization private because they were not ready to understand what it meant. Perhaps it was your calmness when others expected you to react. Perhaps it was the way you remained yourself when nobody was applauding you. Perhaps it was something you said without realizing how deeply it would stay with them. Whatever that moment was, it became the beginning of a question they could no longer ignore. Why does this person feel different? They tried to answer it logically. They compared the connection to experiences they already understood. They told themselves that time would make everything clearer. But time did something unexpected. It made the question stronger. Stay with this, because the important part is not that your soulmate has something to say. The important part is why they can no longer keep it inside. Recently, a small moment brought everything back to the surface. It may have been a conversation, a familiar place, an old memory, a photograph, a name unexpectedly mentioned, or simply one quiet evening when their thoughts returned to you without invitation. And suddenly, they understood something they had been avoiding. Some connections do not become meaningful because of one dramatic event. They become meaningful because the same person continues to matter even after the moment has passed. That realization caught them by surprise. Your soulmate began remembering details they thought they had forgotten, the tone of your voice, something unusual you once said, a moment when you showed kindness without expecting anything back, the way your presence changed the atmosphere around you. And then came the thought that stopped them: what if I have underestimated what this person means to me? That is where the conversation began forming. Not outside them, but inside them. Sentence by sentence. Question by question. Until finally one sentence remained: I have something important to tell you. But wait, because what comes after those words is where the story takes its first unexpected turn. Something has shifted inside your soulmate, and strangely, it did not begin with certainty, it began with resistance. They tried to convince themselves that there was no reason to make this conversation bigger than it needed to be. They thought perhaps they could wait. Perhaps another week would make the feeling quieter. Perhaps another distraction would move their attention elsewhere. Yet every attempt to move away seemed to lead them back toward the same realization. You were not disappearing from their thoughts. In fact, the more they tried to reduce the importance of the connection, the more specific their memories became. That matters, because people can forget excitement, but it is much harder to forget meaning. Your soulmate started noticing that when they imagined certain future moments, celebrations, quiet mornings, meaningful achievements, unfamiliar places, even ordinary conversations, your presence somehow entered the picture. Not as a fantasy they were forcing, but as a question: would this moment feel different if they were here? That question opened something they had kept carefully closed. And then someone around them may have noticed the change. Nothing dramatic had to happen. Sometimes another person only needs to ask, "You seem distracted lately. What are you thinking about?" Your soulmate may have smiled, changed the subject, or given an incomplete answer. But internally, your name had already appeared. Here is the surprising part: they were not only thinking about what they feel. They were thinking about what you might feel. That changed everything. For the first time, they began wondering whether their silence could have created uncertainty for you. They considered whether you had ever interpreted their hesitation as indifference. They wondered whether there were moments when you expected clarity and received distance instead. And that thought stayed with them longer than they expected. Your soulmate realized that saying nothing is still a choice, and sometimes silence communicates something completely different from what the heart intends. So the words became heavier: "I have something important to tell you." But what exactly? Stay a little longer, because the obvious answer is not the whole answer. They do want to tell you that you matter. They do want to explain why their behavior may have seemed difficult to understand. Yet underneath those things is something even more personal. They want to tell you about the moment they first realized that you had affected their vision of the future. It was not necessarily when they first noticed you. It came later, after they had enough time to recognize the difference between temporary fascination and genuine emotional significance. One day, they encountered something they would normally have experienced alone, and their first instinct was to imagine telling you about it. That instinct surprised them. Why you? Why did your reaction matter? Why did they suddenly want your opinion? That tiny moment revealed something enormous. You had quietly become someone whose presence mattered even when you were absent. And once your soulmate understood that, they could no longer pretend this was just another passing connection. But there is another layer they still have not spoken aloud, and it explains why this conversation has taken so long. Your soulmate has been rehearsing the truth because they are trying to find words worthy of what they actually mean. Imagine them beginning with one sentence, stopping, changing it, then starting again. "There's something I should have told you earlier." "No, that does not sound right. I've been thinking about us." Too vague. "You mean more to me than you probably realize." Closer, but still incomplete. Eventually they return to the simplest version: "I have something important to tell you." Why? Because sometimes the deepest conversations begin with the fewest words. They do not want to overwhelm the moment with a perfect speech. They want to finally be clear. And clarity is exactly what has been missing. Your soulmate knows there may have been mixed signals. Moments when they seemed close followed by moments when they became quieter. Times when their attention seemed unmistakable, yet their words remained carefully controlled. You may have wondered whether you imagined the depth. But from their perspective, something else was happening. They were trying to understand themselves before asking you to understand them. That distinction changes the entire picture. Their hesitation was not necessarily the absence of emotion. Sometimes it was the presence of more emotion than they expected. What if this moment changes your entire understanding of the past? Because when your soulmate finally explains themselves, certain confusing moments may suddenly connect. A conversation that ended too quickly. A look that lingered slightly longer than expected. A question they asked about your future that seemed casual at the time. The way they remembered a detail you assumed they had forgotten. Those moments may not have been random at all. They were pieces of an internal realization your soulmate had not yet named. And recently, something made those pieces come together. They understood that waiting for perfect certainty could become another way of avoiding honesty. Nobody receives a complete map of the future before taking an emotionally meaningful step. Eventually, two people have to speak honestly and discover what becomes possible from there. That is what your soulmate is approaching now, not a perfectly scripted destination, but an honest beginning. And the revelation they want to give you is surprisingly simple. They have started seeing you not merely as someone connected to their present emotions, but as someone they could genuinely imagine beside them in a different chapter of life. A calmer chapter. A more intentional chapter. One where communication replaces guessing and mutual understanding replaces uncertainty. They have imagined what it would feel like to stop wondering and finally know where you stand with each other. That thought once felt intimidating. Now it feels strangely peaceful. And that peaceful feeling is what surprised them most. Because when something is merely exciting, the imagination races. But when something begins to feel meaningful, the heart often becomes quieter. Your soulmate noticed that thinking about you no longer only creates questions. Increasingly, it creates a sense of direction. Yet there is still one question they desperately want answered, and only you can answer it. Here is where everything becomes more personal. Your soulmate is wondering whether they still have the chance to tell you what they should have said earlier. They do not know exactly how your heart has changed during the silence. They do not know which assumptions you made, which questions you stopped asking, or whether you quietly decided to protect your peace by expecting less. That uncertainty has become the final obstacle standing between thought and conversation. Your soulmate can prepare every sentence except your response. And strangely, that is also what makes this moment meaningful. They are beginning to understand that genuine connection requires vulnerability, not dramatic gestures, not impossible promises, but the willingness to speak without controlling the outcome. So what do they want you to know? First, that you affected them more deeply than their behavior may have revealed. Second, that certain qualities in you became clearer with time rather than fading with familiarity. Third, that their silence did not erase the importance of what they felt. And finally, there is something they discovered about themselves because of you. Before this connection, they may have believed they knew exactly what kind of person would capture their attention. They had expectations, preferences, perhaps even an imaginary picture of how meaningful love was supposed to arrive. Then you appeared in a way that challenged some of those assumptions. Something about your individuality made them reconsider what actually matters. Maybe it was your resilience. Maybe your emotional depth. Maybe the fact that you were imperfect but authentic. Maybe you carried a combination of strength and softness they did not expect. Whatever it was, you changed the question from, "Does this person fit my expectations?" to, "Were my expectations ever big enough to recognize something real?" That is a powerful shift. And your soulmate knows it. They have been looking backward at their own choices and realizing how often people miss meaningful connections because they are searching for familiarity instead of depth. You made them reconsider that pattern. But listen closely, the most surprising revelation is still ahead. They are not preparing this conversation merely to confess something about yesterday. They want to ask something about tomorrow. There is an idea they have quietly entertained, something that once seemed too early to mention. It may involve spending more intentional time together, opening communication more consistently, sharing a place or experience that matters to them, or simply giving this connection a genuine opportunity without hiding behind ambiguity. They are not trying to promise an entire lifetime in one conversation. They are thinking about one honest next step. And sometimes one honest step can change the direction of two lives. Your soulmate has realized they would rather discover what is possible than spend months wondering what might have happened if they had spoken. That realization has given them a courage they did not have before. Now imagine the moment, the conversation becomes quiet, their expression changes, and the words finally arrive, "I have something important to tell you." You wait. They pause. Then they say something you did not expect. And this is the moment everything has been leading toward. Your soulmate does not begin by telling you what they want from you. They begin by telling you what they have finally understood about you. They tell you that your presence stayed with them in ways they could not explain. They admit there were times they deliberately distracted themselves because thinking about you forced them to confront feelings they had not organized yet. They tell you about the small memory that kept returning, the conversation they replayed, the quality in you they noticed only after enough time had passed. Then comes the sentence they were most afraid of saying because it makes everything unmistakably clear. "I don't want to keep pretending this connection means less to me than it actually does." Silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that arrives when two people realize the conversation has crossed a line from speculation into honesty. Your soulmate continues. They explain that they do not expect you to instantly know what happens next. They are not asking you to erase every question or forget every confusing moment. They simply do not want another chapter to begin with something important left unsaid. Then they reveal the detail that changes the emotional weight of everything they had considered telling you before. There was another moment, perhaps weeks or months earlier, when they nearly opened this conversation. They came close. The words were there. But something stopped them, not because the feeling disappeared, but because they questioned whether the timing was right. Ever since, they have wondered what might have happened if they had spoken then. That unfinished moment became a private turning point. It taught them that opportunities for honesty should not always be postponed until circumstances become perfect. And now they have decided they do not want to repeat the same hesitation. They want you to know that they see something worth exploring between you. Something that deserves honesty, patience, and real communication. They want to know you beyond assumptions. They want to hear the things you never had space to explain. They want to understand what this connection has looked like from your side. And perhaps most importantly, they are prepared to listen instead of simply speaking. Because the real revelation is not, "I have something important to tell you." The real revelation is what those words represent. Your soulmate has reached the point where silence feels less truthful than vulnerability. Whatever comes next must be chosen by two people, freely and honestly, but something has already changed inside them. They are no longer asking themselves whether you mattered. They know you did. They are no longer wondering whether the connection affected them. They know it has. The question now is whether two people who have spent so much time wondering are finally ready to replace uncertainty with a real conversation. And when your soulmate looks at you after revealing everything, there may be one final sentence, quieter than everything before it, but far more important: I just needed you to know the truth before another moment passed us by.